Good evening and welcome to Case File Reports. Breaking tonight out of Alabama, Governor Kay Ivey has signed a new death warrant for death row inmate Jeffery Lee, setting a September 17th execution window. But this is not an ordinary death warrant. This case has already reached the United States Supreme Court once this year, and despite the execution remaining lawful, the court stopped Alabama from using its planned execution method just weeks ago. Federal courts blocked Alabama from executing Lee using nitrogen hypoxia, ruling that the method could not legally be used against him. Now, the state is moving forward with a completely different execution method. Tonight, we'll explain exactly who Jeffery Lee is and why his case is so closely watched. Jeffery James Lee is now 49 years old. He has spent more than 2 decades on Alabama's death row after being convicted of 2 counts of capital murder and 1 count of attempted murder. His case dates back nearly 28 years, to a violent robbery inside a pawn shop in Orrville, Alabama. According to court records, Jeffery Lee entered a local pawn shop armed with a sawed-off shotgun. Inside were 3 people: Jimmy Ellis, Elaine Thompson, and employee Helen King. Prosecutors said Lee opened fire inside the store. Jimmy Ellis and Elaine Thompson were killed. Helen King survived after being wounded during the attack. Authorities later arrested Lee in Georgia. He confessed to the shootings, although he claimed the first shot had been accidental. Surveillance video from inside the shop was presented during the investigation and later became part of the evidence. In April of 2000, a Dallas County jury found Jeffery Lee guilty of capital murder. The jury voted 7-5 to sentence Lee to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But what happened next is one of the reasons his case is still discussed today. The trial judge overruled the jury's recommendation and instead sentenced Lee to death through a legal practice known as judicial override. Years later, Alabama abolished this practice, but the law was not made retroactive. Jeffery Lee's death sentence remained in place for more than 25 years. Jeffery Lee remained on Alabama's death row while his case moved through the courts. Then, in 2026, the legal battle shifted away from the conviction itself and focused instead on how the state intended to carry out the execution. Alabama believed Jeffery Lee would become another inmate executed using nitrogen hypoxia. Instead, federal courts stopped the execution. The legal battle centered on how the state planned to carry out his death sentence, not his underlying conviction. Nitrogen hypoxia replaces oxygen with nitrogen gas, causing death from deprivation. Lee's attorneys argued the protocol violated the 8th Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, citing risks of prolonged physical suffering and distress. The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled the anticipated suffering presented a substantial risk of serious harm. Following that ruling, the district court permanently prohibited Alabama from executing Lee using nitrogen hypoxia. The Supreme Court declined to intervene, leaving the order in place. That decision did not overturn the death sentence, but it barred one execution method. Almost immediately, the state changed course. Attorney General Steve Marshall argued that nothing prevented Alabama from using lethal injection, a method already authorized under state law. The Alabama Supreme Court granted the request, and Governor Kay Ivey established a new execution window for September 17th. Outside the courtroom, organizations like Death Penalty Action have publicly opposed the protocol. Regardless of the campaigns, the legal question remains focused on constitutional compliance. Jeffery Lee remains housed at Holman Correctional Facility. With nitrogen hypoxia now barred, the return to lethal injection has created a new legal dispute. Lee's attorneys argue the state should not be allowed to switch methods under these circumstances. Whether courts agree will determine the outcome. Legal brief. Here is where the case stands today. Jeffery Lee remains under a valid death sentence. Federal courts have prohibited nitrogen hypoxia for his case, and the state has responded by scheduling lethal injection. As of today, the execution remains scheduled for September 17th. If history has shown us anything, it is that death penalty cases often change in the final days. Emergency motions, requests for stays, and last-minute appeals are expected. The coming weeks will determine whether Alabama can move forward as planned. We will continue following every major filing. At Case File Reports, our goal is to explain not only what happened, but why it matters. Our commitment is to follow these cases from the signing of a death warrant through the appeals process to their legal conclusion. If you want factual, timely updates on death penalty cases, consider subscribing to Case File Reports. Do you think the legal dispute over execution methods should delay a death sentence? Or are states justified in switching methods to carry out the sentence? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Thank you for watching Case File Reports. I'll see you in the next report.